Chapter 9, Banking. In this set of videos, we're going to talk a little bit about the problems with banks. And most of the banks in the United States and in the world are fractional reserve banks. Those banks issue a lot of credit cards and a lot of loans, and there's a lot of risk involved here. So, we talked about in the last set of videos about fractional reserve banking and how a borrower can borrow money from a bank in the form of a credit card or, in our case, a loan. And we had somebody deposit $100 into the bank, and that bank decided to loan $90 of it to a borrower. Now, if you're going to borrow money and get a loan from a bank, then you're going to get $90 in currency today. That is an asset. That is money that you can spend immediately. The problem with a loan is that you don't own the $90. You have to pay that $90 back with interest over time. So, over time, you incur a liability because you incur debt. So once you've paid back the $90 plus interest, you've now gained more debt than you have money. Now, the person who deposited money, they have $100 in their banking account, they can spend that money, and they have access to their $100. But the depositor is not, in this particular case, borrowing or any money. One of the major downsides of fractional reserve banks is that it creates money and spending, but not wealth. People who use loans and credit cards to buy lots of things are creating spending, but you owe more money back on those particular issues of credit than you had in the first place. So, this is why sometimes we see people who are spending a lot of money and we assume that they're wealthy. But if they're buying houses and cars and going on trips and things using credit or loaned money, they're actually generating debt and not wealth. Wealth is the money that you own, the value of the assets you own. If you have purchased something with a loan and you haven't paid it back yet, that property is still technically owned by the bank and not you. Now, another downside of a fractional reserve bank is that the bank doesn't actually have your money at the bank. Remember, they took some of the money out of your account and they gave it to somebody else. So your money exists on the computer, but they've actually loaned out most of your money to other customers. This can create a run on the bank. So during a recession, when lots of people are feeling poorer than normal, unemployment is high, people might have to dip into their savings and might have to sell off things like stocks and bonds in order to pay their bills. When more people go to the bank and take money out, withdraw their money than the bank had predicted, remember the bank doesn't have enough money to give it all out to people. So if more and more people keep showing up the bank asking for their money, the bank doesn't have it. And that triggers a run on the bank. Because the bank doesn't have your money, they can't give you your money back if there's a run on the bank. This is what happened during the Great Depression. It's also what happens when we have a lot of really big recessions, including the last big recession in 2008. Now, there's also a bank called the Federal Reserve or the central bank of a country. All major economies, the government has a central banking system, and this is an institution that oversees private banking system and regulates the supply of money in the circulation in the economy. The central bank is the one that decides monetary policy. So they can play around with the money supply. They could print more or take money out of the system. They could incentivize people to borrow or to spend. And that monetary policy will trigger things like the interest rate. And the interest rate, of course, could trigger us to save money at high interest or to borrow money at low interest rates. In the United States, we call our central bank the Federal Reserve Bank or the Fed.